I'm very excited to have the opportunity to host a book panel as part of our ISNTD Festival. It's the first time we've done something like this, but it seemed that there were quite a few extremely thought-provoking books out there around public health, tropical diseases, infectious diseases, that it would be a shame not to hear a little bit more about the effort and the thinking behind all of these. So it's been my absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to welcome today Mojie Crigler from the ISNTD, Christine Poulson, author and art historian, and hopefully very, very soon, Professor Peter Hotez, who comes with a lot of different hats and introduction, whether Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine, co-director at Texas Children's Hospital, professor at the University of Texas, founding editor-in-chief of the journal PLOS NTDs, and the list goes on, and most importantly, an incredible communicator about neglected tropical diseases and a great advocate. So 3 authors, 3 very different books. I think that the best people to introduce those books would be the authors themselves. Mojie Crigler, you are from the ISNTD. You're a writer in residence there, and you have written a book called Under the Big Tree, which kind of charts the extraordinary effort to control and tackle neglected tropical diseases. That is, in fact, the subtitle of the book. So I was wondering whether you might be able to give us a few words about the book, what it's about, and how it came to be.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Can I be heard okay? Okay, thanks. What a great time being here. This is wonderful. The book is for sale upstairs, also in the bookstore, and you get a 10% discount. So don't forget to mention that you're part of this.
I was going to mention it again, so in case you haven't heard, it is the 3 books are available, and I would suggest being very organized if you are going to maybe consider self-isolation for 2 weeks in the next few weeks. You want to have these 3 books with you, so please run and get them.
So my background is I'm a writer. I'm a freelance writer. I've been writing for 20 years in a variety of different areas. I write fiction, short stories. I started out as a playwright, and I published a memoir called Get Me Through Tomorrow, which was about my experience helping my brother recover from a devastating hemorrhagic stroke, which he did recover from. And there had been a documentary film made about his recovery, which was great in terms of getting that story to many people. It aired in the States on PBS, on their POV series. And I felt like the documentary didn't delve deeply enough into the medical details. And so that was my goal with that book, was to write a book about the brain, brain injury, brain recovery, in a way that anybody could read it, enjoy the book, and understand the pharmaceutical aspect of it, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and the sort of other element of recovery, laying on of hands, love, empathy. So I wrote that book. It was published in 2015, and the CEO of the ISNTD, Ellen Agler, read it and asked me if I could help her write a book about NTDs. The ISNTD is a private philanthropic initiative that's dedicated to eliminating or controlling or bringing down the number of the 5 most prevalent NTDs: schistosomiasis, trachoma, lymphatic filariasis, the soil-transmitted helminths, and river blindness. And Ellen's feeling was that she entered this space in 2012 and read a lot of research papers, academic papers, and textbooks on NTDs, but felt that what was lacking was a book that anybody could pick up and read and enjoy and understand. So we wrote this book together. and it was published last year by Johns Hopkins University Press. And the subtitle is, so it's Under the Big Tree is the title, and the subtitle is Extraordinary Stories from the Movement to End Neglected Tropical Diseases. Our main goal was to tell stories and to show how many people are involved in this effort, from the local community drug distributors, program managers, people in the government, donors, academics, researchers, scientists, and people carrying the diseases, to include their stories as well.
Wonderful, and that really translates in the book. I mean, whether you are completely new to neglected tropical diseases or whether you are, it is really your field of expertise, there is a beautiful storytelling in there that fills the gaps wherever you are on the kind of knowledge spectrum about tropical diseases. So we'll come back to that in a few minutes. Christine, I am a little bit worried about you because in your own words, you do write that you were a respectable academic lecturing in art history at a Cambridge college before turning to crime. And so I then kind of came across a text which is written by Christine, and I thought I would share with you because I think that will give a great picture of Christine. And it's called Murder by Mosquito. I'll only read the beginning. But how would you go about murdering someone with a mosquito infected with malaria? I asked Gareth. I clicked on the send button with some trepidation. Gareth works at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, where he does research aimed at saving people's lives. I didn't know how he'd feel about advising me on how to bump them off instead. This is fun, he replied, adding that it made a change from writing grant proposals and reviewing scientific papers. I gave a sigh of relief. I was in business. And I think that introduction really summarizes some of the themes that come across in Christine's fiction, but also gives a great introduction as to the work that you put in to create your medical thrillers and your crime novels. And so, Christine, I was wondering whether you could give us a little bit more information about your recent book, An Air That Kills, and how you go about to constructing these absolutely wonderful medical thrillers.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I perhaps ought to begin by saying that I'm slightly nervous to be in this assembly because I'm not a scientist. And my scientific education ended at 16 with what was then O-level biology. But I hope what I am good at is finding the right people to talk to and finding out about things. My latest novel, An Air That Kills, is the third in a series. And in the first one, my main character, Katie Flanagan, is a mid-30s researcher doing research into a blood disorder. I also ought to mention that I've got a very helpful haematologist sister-in-law who's also helped me to get in touch with the right people to commit my crimes. So in the first novel, she's a whistleblower at the end. She uncovers dastardly deeds in the lab. In the second, to get away from it all, she takes a job as a medic on an Antarctic base, remote research base. So by the time I got to write the third, I was wondering what on earth what trouble I could get her into next. And then a couple of years ago, I read a headline in The Guardian on the front page about deadly blunders in science labs. Perhaps I also ought to add that most of the scientists in my books are really great people. It's only just, but they are crime novels, so someone has to do something very wrong at some point. So that set me thinking. There were hair-raising stories of live dengue fever being sent through the post. Of course, it's sensationalized, it's journalism. But it reminded me of years and years ago when I was a postgraduate at Birmingham University. There was an outbreak of smallpox in the lab. A photographic assistant contracted smallpox, which must have somehow come from the lab underneath, and she ended up being the last person to die of smallpox before the World Health Organization declared that it had been eradicated. So, although I never felt in danger myself, the strict quarantine regulations were put in place, but still, it was something that had happened, in the university where I was actually studying, and somehow that had stayed in my mind all those years. And I thought, okay, I'm going to send her to a research lab where something is very wrong, and she's going undercover to try and find out what it is, and something nasty is going to escape. Through the process of one person knowing another and sort of passing me on from one person to another, I managed to talk to someone who had worked at Porton Down and realised that a Category 4 lab wasn't going to work for my purposes. It would have to be a Category 3 lab. And again, people are really very helpful, and if you really want to know about the work that they do. And so that was how I ended up at Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, visiting the insectary, and as luck would have it, there was a Category 3 lab that wasn't in use that day, and it had been sterilised and so on. So I was able to go in there and learn about how you would go about infecting a mosquito with malaria. And it all went on from there, really.
That's fantastic. And, as I mentioned, quite a few colleagues, including Professor David Molyneux, are here from the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. So I do hope you get a chance to
meet them a lot. Yes,
yeah.
They're great.
I should probably add at this point that Christine actually was due to be on a wonderful trip in Australia with her daughter, who just completed her A-levels, and politely declined this invitation, actually, at the time. And, declined the invitation to speak about her novel about a global virus kind of shutting down the world. And it seems to me somewhat ironic that fact has caught up with fiction several weeks down the line. And although for us it's a silver lining to every cloud, Christine cancelled her trip due to COVID-19 and is here with us today. And I just wanted to ask in that context something perhaps to both of you, but in a slightly different way. The public is increasingly knowledgeable about science, STEM issues, environmental causes. The appetite is there and really growing. In a world where there is so much information, in the case of viral diseases, on the news, on a 24-hour cycle, but for NTDs, research papers, academic texts, where do both of you feel that the book has a really important role in contrast or in parallel to all those other sources of information?
Well, as I said, I think that Under the Big Tree fills a gap there. I mean, it is it's short. It's, I think, 196 pages, so, you could read it on a flight or in a day or two. And I think it's, a lot of the discussion earlier today was about how do you inform people about NTDs, and how do you disseminate knowledge, and how do you make the connection between knowledge and action. And so I think this book is one tool. It's an advocacy tool. When Ellen and I sat down to start working on it, it was very clear that was, the purpose. And it's now being taught at some universities. We created a free downloadable teaching guide that goes with it. I worked with a high school teacher actually in the States who he used the book with his class before it was published, but it was a great experiment. Fantastic teacher, and he had the students work on questions of stigma. This is in North Carolina, where they're no longer dealing with hookworm, and none of the other NTDs are there, but they were able to relate to some of the issues that are connected to NTDs just by sort of turning the questions. For example, about stigma. What is a stigma? What's taboo in your community? And to then start thinking about relating that to the issues as they pertain to these diseases. Mm-hmm. So I would say advocacy, education. That's places where this book fits in.
Yes, I'd add to that although there is a continuous news stream, and if you want to know about coronavirus and where the latest cases are and what the numbers are, that's instantly available. But when I came to write this book, I had no idea that so many people and so many children died of malaria every year. So, it is neglected tropical diseases, isn't it? Mm. So if in a small way people reading my novel realise that this is a huge problem, and perhaps are encouraged to donate to a charity, there's still... It's only the headline-grabbing things that really people are most aware of. So I think popular fiction and non-fiction can make people more aware of them.
Maybe gives you a bit longer than 15 seconds to stay with a thought and kind of really take it with you for a couple of weeks or however long it takes to read. In perfect, impeccable timing, Peter has apparently joined us now. So, hello. Oh, hi there. Oh, nearly. Good morning, Peter. Can you hear us?
How are you?
Hi, we're great. I would like to thank you for your effort driving all the way to work to find a connection that could possibly work. So that is, I was saying you were a great science communicator, and particularly about tropical diseases, but this takes the dedication to another level. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks. I was just on BBC World at home via Skype, and then unfortunately you needed special Skype for business for this one, so I couldn't figure that out at home. So
well,
here I am.
We're very grateful, and so Mojie and Christine are here, and we're just introducing their books, and we thought this would be a great, I've introduced you as well, as many of your roles as I could remember in a few minutes, and we thought it would be a great opportunity now to hear from you a little bit more about your book, Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, and sort of the idea and the motivations behind it, and what kind of what kind of encouraged you as a scientist to choose the format of a book to tackle this very important issue?
Well, thanks so much. Over the years, this is actually my third book, single author book that I've written. And I've tried to use books as almost like advocacy tools, because merely writing a scientific paper or writing grants and the usual things academics do is often not sufficient to reach a bigger, larger audience. And at least for now, people still read books, which is great. I think the other motivation for my writing a book is I had this horrible realization that I had very little written record of my presence here on planet Earth. Between now that all scientific papers are moving towards electronic formats and everything is on email, I realized that the memory of all of our existences will be erased pretty soon. So at least somewhere one day someone will find a book under a pile of things, and that was also one of the drivers. So the first book I wrote was in the early 2000s to raise awareness about neglected tropical diseases. Kind of in the similar spirit that Mojie and Ellen Agler wrote their outstanding book, and that was an important forgotten people of forgotten diseases. When it started, my kids, who were then kids, now they're adults, used to call it Dad's Forgotten Book on Forgotten People with Forgotten Diseases. But it's now gone into its second edition, and I think it's made some impact, and it's gotten people to care about these conditions. And in that sense, it really served its purpose. The second book single author book I did was called Blue Marble Health, and that one has not really caught on yet. So after being really successful, being an advocate, raising awareness about NTDs, I thought, hey, this advocacy stuff's not so hard. And ever since then, I've mostly failed as an advocate. The Blue Marble Health book was to try to raise awareness about this hidden burden of neglected diseases of poverty in wealthy countries, because using some numbers based from the World Health Organization or the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, it looks like this interesting phenomenon that most of the world's poverty-related neglected diseases are not necessarily in the poorest, most devastated countries of Africa, as many believe, but in fact it's the poor living in wealthy countries, including around 12 million Americans who live with a poverty-related neglected tropical disease. And that one has not really caught on. It's been very hard to get people to accept that we have poverty in the United States, although earlier this year we got Senator Cory Booker in the United States, who is running for president, to submit legislation to address this. So maybe it's slowly catching on. And then this latest book was around a vacuum, a niche. In fact, I guess you could argue all three of my books were in response to what I perceived as a gap that people weren't speaking out at the time. So that was true of forgotten people, forgotten diseases, getting people to care about neglected tropical diseases, because at the time they were called other diseases by the Millennium Development Goals. Blue Marble Health, about the fact that nobody was speaking on behalf of the poor in the United States. And this third one, which is my most personal one yet, is around the fact that we've got this aggressive anti-vaccine movement, particularly in the United States. And I moved to Texas about a decade ago to build this School of Tropical Medicine and the Center for Vaccine Development. And to my horror, we realized there are about 65,000 kids being denied access to vaccines in the state of Texas, all for fake reasons. And once again, I perceived a vacuum that nobody was really talking. And the fact that I'm both a vaccine scientist and pediatrician and also parent of Rachel, who has autism and a number of intellectual disabilities, I thought to myself, well, if I don't say something, who will? And I've now written the book. It came out at the end of 2018, and And Mojie actually helped me quite a bit. She gave me a lot of good advice on how to make it more interesting. And she gave me the best suggestion of all. She looked at it and she said, Peter, this is great, but I think it would be more powerful if you gave your wife Anne a greater voice, and also Rachel's voice a little bit more. And she's brilliant. She was absolutely right. And that, I think, was what made the book, really differentiated the book, because it created a new type of science book. It's a science book. It goes into the science, explaining why vaccines don't cause autism. It goes into what autism is and the genes involved in early fetal brain development and the whole exome sequencing we did on Rachel and my wife and I. But it also interwove a more personal story. And I haven't seen too many books like that mix a scientist's personal story with the actual science. And I think it's made for a very interesting, very powerful book. And maybe there's a message there. And now I've started working on a fourth book and trying to apply some of the lessons learned from the Rachel book towards that. So I'll stop there for a minute and see if you have some thoughts, or maybe Mojie has some thoughts.
Thanks for your kind words, Peter.
Well, we look forward to having you back next year for the fourth book, by the way. So,
thanks. The working title is Vaccine Diplomacy in an Age of War, Political Collapse, Climate Change, and Anti-Science. I don't think that'll fly as a real title, but that's still a work in progress.
Yeah.
But you get the idea. It really looks at what's happening in Democratic Republic of Congo with the return of measles and Ebola, in Venezuela with the collapse of the regime there and the decimation of Yanomami and other indigenous populations, and the steep rise in malaria with the malaria mines, and really looks at how, and my premise of the newest book is that we've made great progress through vaccines since the Millennium Development Goals and the formation of Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, as well as the mass treatment programs for NTDs, and we've made steady declines in a number of these diseases. But I believe in the last few years, we've actually slowed, halted, or even reversed some of those gains, and due to these modern 21st century forces, and it addresses that.
absolutely. Well, I had asked our three authors to choose one, it's very difficult, one quote to kind of share with us. Then we'll open up for questions and a discussion. I'm sure the audience have a lot of questions for you. Peter, would you mind to read us the quote that you had chosen?
Yeah, sure. So the quote that I singled out for today says today the anti-vaccine groups still attempt to refute these findings. Well, let me start again. So from my perspective, there's no ambiguity. The science clearly finds there's no association between vaccines and autism. Today, the anti-vaccine groups still attempt to refute these findings. They do so in interesting ways, such as trying to find mistakes in the methods, or even resorting to conspiracy theories stating that the papers are fake news. By persisting in these actions, they're doing a disservice to children and adults with autism and their families.
Absolutely. Mojie, would you like to read us your quote?
Can I respond
Well,
to
of
Peter's
course.
quote? Because it
Absolutely.
just got me thinking about the question of truth and fear. A book is a great way that you can lay down the truth as you see it and back it up with facts and your bibliography and citations. You have the space to do that. And I think that the movement against vaccines, as well as other ways in which people are scared off of getting medical treatment, it leverages fear. We all have fear about death or any other number of things, and so I think that's a common thread here with our books is, I think in some ways they each explore that vulnerability that we have as human beings and being naturally afraid of the unknown or something somebody tells us, versus investigating to find the truth. And whether it's the truth that we've put down in the book or a story about somebody, investigating the truth behind mysterious murders in the lab, So, and I just want to sort of underline when Peter was talking about, adding in his wife and daughter's voice into his book. I feel like that's been a common theme here in the last couple of days. So I just want to say that because Peter hasn't been here, but it really has been something that I've heard a lot in the presentations. It's just that ingredient of empathy, of personal narrative, as necessary for delivering information.
Yes,
Mojie, I think, you've tapped into something, especially among this younger generation. They want more personal stories. They want, there's a commitment to public service among younger people that we've never seen before. And I think books can tap into that more than just the straightforward science paper. And so I think this is a new opportunity for young people to think about in terms of expressing themselves, is thinking about writing a book. I think the problem with it partly is, especially if they're in academia, we don't recognize it as being substantive. One of the things that I realized writing books is, even though I'm a professor now at Dean, I still have a boss and I still have to fill out an annual evaluation form. And nowhere on that evaluation form is there a place to write what books you've written. It's all about your scientific papers in high impact journals, or it's about the grant support you've brought in, or if you're a clinician, how many hours of patient contact and revenue you've brought in. And so that's one of the things I think that has to change in biomedical science, is recognizing that other modes of communication like this and other forms of public engagement are absolutely critical. And it's especially critical now because I have a paper coming out in PLOS, hopefully in a few weeks, about the rise in anti-science movements, including the anti-vaccine movement, but not only the anti-vaccine movement. And my argument is partly anti-science movements have risen because there's, again, a vacuum, and the vacuum is scientists are not engaging the public. Scientists aren't speaking out. We're invisible. And basically the American public, and probably in the UK as well, has no clue of what a scientist or a public health expert actually does on a day-to-day basis, because all of our writings are very inward looking, very all about writing and speaking for each other. And this is provided an entryway for anti-science groups to speak out and to have much more prominence. And I think we have to change the culture of how we do science, the culture of how we do public health. We have to get much better in engaging public audiences. And we're seeing this play out now with coronavirus in the United States, that the CDC is not being very effective, but the Centers for Disease Control is not being very effective in engaging the public. And this, again, creates a vacuum and allows conspiracy theories to take hold. So this is a new role, I think, for books to get to audiences that we ordinarily don't seem to be able to reach.
Great. Absolutely. I invite you both to read your chosen quotes before we open that up to the audience. Christine, if you want to start. This may ring a bell.
Yes, I'll just set the scene, which is that my character, Katie, is going to work as a technician at a Category 3 lab where an attempt is being made to work out the mechanism by which strain of avian flu might jump the species gap. And she's reading up before she goes, and she thinks, this is from her point of view, the Spanish flu epidemic had infected an estimated 50 million people worldwide, about a third of the planet's population. It was staggering, and that was before mass communications and cheap air travel. Katie thought about how fast it would have spread if it had happened today and felt a chill. She saw people incubating the virus, boarding planes, taking their deadly cargo to all corners of the globe.
Mojie?
Okay. So the quote I chose, it's short. Ivermectin was a thread of possibility in a knot of obstacles.
All right, thank you. So does anyone in the audience, we've got about 5, maximum 10 minutes for comments or questions. Would anyone in the audience like to perhaps react to some of the things they've heard today, or ask the authors any questions?
Hi, I just want to say hello to Peter. It's David here. So, no, thanks very much, all of you. I just wanted to pick up on Christine's comments. Having worked in the Liverpool School for over 50 years, the security arrangements when I started were pretty minimal. And I was also privileged to work at Porton Down. So it's a different world. But I want to just get the time frame on your remarks about smallpox and the case in Birmingham, because there was also a case about half a mile from here in the London School. But I'd like to know the date, because smallpox was certified eradicated in 1980 by the World Health Assembly. I think both those cases were after 1980, if I'm not correct.
The Birmingham one wasn't. It was, and I can pinpoint it quite, I think it was 1978.
Okay. Well, it doesn't matter. It's the point I'm making is the definition of eradication.
Yeah.
And the problems we're facing with eradication now, with guinea worm and polio on the one hand, and the use of the term eradication in context of malaria, which is another matter. But it comes back to Peter's point, and I think it's extremely well made in the context of what we're seeing in Venezuela. Venezuela actually, through Arnaldo Gabaldon in the 1950s and 1960s, had eliminated malaria, certainly the disease, and probably the infection. Nowadays, we're facing with polio and guinea worm exactly the same problems of certifying eradication, which is going to be a huge challenge because you've got Pakistan and Afghanistan in the case of polio problems. You've got huge problems with our dog infections in Chad. Epidemiology is changing. We have the circulating polio, vaccine-derived polio now circulating in many countries. So when one gets down to what we call the last mile, it becomes increasingly difficult. And you cannot describe Pakistan, Afghanistan, Chad, CAR as secure places where if we're going to get to eradication, we've got to certify it. And that is, in those settings, extremely difficult. And as you see from the example Peter quoted of Venezuela, once you've got civil unrest and lack of stability and a dramatically reduced health system and capacity, then you're in serious problems. And then put that on top of the other problems of climate change, the potential for the coronavirus pandemic. I think that we have to get a little bit more realistic about our expectations of what public health programs can do.
Yeah, certainly I absolutely agree. And this is going to be the big challenge because the level of atrocities that are going on in some of these countries is making it so difficult to even think about the last mile, so that the eradication and elimination goals are really more aspirational to inspire people to move towards it rather than an actual reality. Although I will say, I mean, it is an extraordinary story one that's not really been told yet of what's happened in the DR Congo last year, where against all odds, more than 200,000 people were enrolled in clinical trials for the Ebola vaccine. And fortunately, the Ebola vaccine turned out to be amazing, resulting in 90% protection. And how that was actually done is probably one of the great public health stories yet to be adequately told, because I believe it not only prevented an Ebola situation that might have dwarfed what we saw in West Africa in 2014, it prevented a situation that might have stabilized the entire African continent. So I think it's really worth looking at lessons learned from that extraordinary vaccination campaign. It wouldn't surprise me if there's some people in this audience who are involved in that, but that's one of the great public health stories that needs to be told.
Steve Maud, you had a question?
Yeah, hi. I'm just wondering, as writers about NTDs and the reviews that you've had and the reception that you've had to your works, I mean, how much do you feel the public really understand NTDs these days, and is it on their maps, or is it still something that just us in this room kind of care about?
Well, coming from the States, I can say that sadly, in the United States, it was very hard to get traction for the book, hard to get it reviewed, hard to get any kind of publicity. It was better here in the UK, and that was happening even as there was this, and this happened while we were writing the book, but the hookworm has come back in the American South, and it is due to poor sanitation, inadequate sanitation. And so it was hard. I mean, it's the question that we've all been talking about for the last 2 days and listening to people talk about is, how do you make that connection? And it does go to telling stories about the people and, the people that are doing the work that's making a difference. I chose this quote about ivermectin was a thread of possibility and a knot of obstacles, because there were so many ways in which ivermectin might have not come about. It so easily couldn't have happened, and then it so easily couldn't have been donated and distributed, and then even the method of distribution, if it had been some top-down distribution program, it wouldn't have worked. But to put it into the hands of the villagers who would be able to do it, really do it, it's just a phenomenal story. It's chapter 3 in my book, but I feel that that is also true for a lot of these other diseases where there is some possible way through. It's just there are so many obstacles, and so but it is, as Peter was just saying, you keep going, you aspire to find that, just as you aspire to get the stories out there. If the people in here haven't figured it out, then it probably hasn't. We don't have the magic key to how do we get people to really understand the importance of these diseases the way they should.
Well, in my case, my reviews, naturally, because I'm writing a crime novel, do focus on whether it works as a crime novel. But what I hope is that when I'm writing it, I have to think first and foremost about whether I'm writing a good story, because otherwise people are not going to read on. So all I can hope really is that as people read, these things become, for instance, the statistics around malaria and the death of children, that they absorb some of that information. That's all I can hope, really.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Do we have one last question? No, well, in that case, perhaps I'll just ask one to conclude. One thing we've seen throughout the festival this year, but also over the years, is a number of creative people, whether they be actors or filmmakers such as Claire and James, and perhaps yourselves, by getting involved in a creative project, have somehow not been able to let go of that disease or topic or field and have become actual ambassadors for the advocacy of that particular issue. In Peter's case, I think it's obviously very clear. These are issues that are 100% important to you, and you're very vocal about them. I was wondering, Christine, Mojie, but also for yourself, how do you see the future in terms of the book shaping perhaps your desire to become real outspoken advocates about these causes? Has that reinforced it?
Well, after learning about malaria myself, I did decide to donate some of my advance to the Against Malaria Foundation, which provides insecticide, provides the bed nets.
Yep.
And I also mentioned that in my acknowledgements at the end. So I feel that it's a charity I'm going to go on supporting. Mm-hmm. So it certainly affected me, and I'm going to go on writing about medical issues. I think it is difficult because medical advances generally are advancing so quickly that there are areas where we haven't caught up with our ethical thinking and worked out what we really should be doing about lots of things. Anyway.
I started out working on this book, Under the Big Tree, with Ellen at the End Fund, and that was 2015. And the End Fund made me their writer in residence. So I've worked with them on other, writing efforts, grant applications, and so forth. And I've taken the lead on, promoting the book to professors and so forth. And then I actually have worked with another writer who was in charge of the river blindness program. He was the manager of the river blindness program at the World Bank for a number of years, Bruce Benton. You could invite him here in a year or two. His book is coming out, and it's on the history of the river blindness program there. And so I really identify as a writer, but I do have this, I feel like I came in through the side door or something of medicine and NTDs. And so as an outsider coming in, I have been amazed at the stories. I'm just from a pure writer and editor point of view, the stories are inspiring, devastating, beautiful. I mean, it's the range of it's life, right? So I feel very privileged to be able to do the thing that I think I do best in this field.
Brilliant. We'll keep an eye out for your future works. Peter, any concluding remarks?
Thanks. Well, I thought this was a very nice session, and I apologize for joining a bit late again. I think, this is potentially a new vehicle for communicating science that we need to expand. I was invited at the end of last year to sort of a high-level meeting on CRISPR-Cas9 at the National Academy of Sciences, and not because I do anything substantive in CRISPR-Cas9, but because they wanted to look at lessons learned from combating the anti-vaccine movement in anticipation that a similar type of anti-science movement might arise, misinformation around CRISPR-Cas9. And I said, look at the two faces that you have right now of CRISPR-Cas9. It's Jiankey, who genetically engineered human embryos and frightened everybody about a new generation of eugenics. And it was a high-level TV program where a prominent professor at Harvard talked about creating a dating app that will provide all of your genetic information to your prospective partner, which also had a very eugenics feel to it. So I said, you're already two steps behind in your public advocacy. And this is a danger. And I think it's going to be a danger for any new science or any new public health initiative. And and now that everything is so amplified on social media, everything is hyped up on Facebook and other social media and e-commerce platforms, that we have to now get around, anticipate the problems that are going to be going on with any new substantive scientific or public health initiative, be prepared for it and be prepared to write about it. And there is going to be an urgent need for a new generation of science communicators. And we haven't really kept up with that at the graduate level or the postdoctoral level. I think there are a couple of exceptions. I think Imperial College has built out a nice program in science communication, but it's too much of it is just for a small cadre of people who aspire to be science journalists. I have made the argument that we now need to build this into the DNA of all science curriculum and medical curriculum. Every PhD student, master's student, doctoral student, postdoctoral student should be getting educated in how to engage the public, and because there is a method to it. And I think that's going to be an important way in the future. So hopefully we'll see more books like the ones we're talking about today, or maybe not. We'll see how it advances.
Definitely. Well, we are on the same wavelength there when it comes to science communication. Peter, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sorry it got a little bit complicated, but it was really much appreciated. Thank you. Mojie as well. Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you to the audience. I hope you really want to read those 3 books now. I would urge you to get a copy. With that, our book session concludes. And I think our authors deserve another great round of applause for their time. Thank you.